here with some new fight updates. The welterweight title fight between Bilal Muhammad and Shavkat Rakhmonov is off due to Bilal having surgery. Stepping up into the main event is flyweight champion Pantoja, who will be facing the debuting Kai Asakura. Kai was the two-time 135-pound men's champion for Ryzen, which is the leading Japanese MMA promotion run by Saki Kibara. This guy is considered one of the hardest hitting strikers at 135 pounds, and he's coming to the UFC and moving down in weight. He faces current UFC flyweight champion Pantoja, who's on a 6-fight win streak, and 3 of those were in title fights. The men's flyweight division is becoming one of the most exciting divisions in the sport, and this fight should be all action.
Alright, so Kai Asakura has finally had his UFC debut announced, where he'll be fighting in his UFC debut against Alexandre Pantoja for the UFC Flyweight Championship as the main event of UFC 310. Now everybody who's watching this video, and who clicked on it likely, is probably thinking, why the hell is a guy making his UFC debut getting a title shot? That's levels of Dana White privilege that is so far completely unheard of. It simply isn't fair. It isn't fair to everybody else in that division, not fair to Brandon Moreno, not fair to Brandon Royval, Kai Kara-France, etc. However, there's a number of very important reasons behind why Kai Asakura is getting this opportunity, and I'll try to explain them all in this video because it's probably pretty difficult for someone outside of Japan to understand them. I'm half Japanese and can speak and read and write the language, so there's a few cultural insights into the regional MMA scene over here that I have that others might not. Also, this video is a remake of a video that I made on my channel in the past. It's just that that video didn't have great audio and my editing skills have improved since then, so I've decided to remake this video since it's now getting pretty close to the fight. Anyways, this video is going to cover 3 major topics. First is going to be the post-Pride Japanese MMA scene. Second is going to be the impact of the Asakura brothers on that MMA scene and their promotion breaking down. And finally, I'm going to cover some of the key reasons why the Japanese MMA market is so lucrative for the UFC, which will help to explain why Kai Asakura is getting as much Dana White privilege as he is. Part 1. The post-Pride Japanese MMA scene. So, starting off, I'm assuming that everybody who has been fed this video by the algorithm is a hardcore MMA fan, so I know you guys know what Pride is and what happened to it. Pride was the biggest and most prestigious MMA org in the world, even more so than the UFC back in the early 2000s. But after the ties to the Yakuza were uncovered in 2006, Pride and the company behind the org, Dream Stage Entertainment, lost their TV contract. What remained of the organization was then sold off to the UFC in 2007. However, this left a big hole in the Japanese MMA scene since all the Japanese fighters who were fighting in regional level promotions like Shuto, Deep, and Pancrase were left with no big Japanese organization to go to. This especially sucked for them because the UFC didn't have the lighter weight classes like flyweight, bantamweight, and featherweight back then, which are the optimal weight classes for most Japanese male fighters. So the only real choice they had was to fight in the WEC. What ended up happening was the company behind K1, the kickboxing promotion, and what was left of the business team that had organized Pride created this promotion called Dream. Now the problem with Dream was that it just didn't draw as many eyeballs as Pride did. I can't say for certain what the causal factor was, but I would say Dream lacked the viewership that Pride did because Dream was an organization that lacked the big heavyweight stars that its predecessor did. When Pride was dissolved, the contracts for their top-tier heavyweight talent were scattered across the world like the 7 Dragon Balls after making a wish. Rampage Jackson went to the UFC, Fader went to Affliction, and sure, they still had Alistair Overeem and Mark Hunt, because those two were contracted under K1's parent company, but it just wasn't the same. As a result, Dream's cards were filled with a lot of very, very good talent, examples being Prime Nick Diaz and Gegard Mousasi, but eventually the parent company ran out of money, and in 2012, the whole thing was pawned off to the guys who run Glory Kickboxing. The 8-year period following the dissolution of Pride in 2007 was considered by many to be the ice age of Japanese MMA. There were no new big stars in this era, and the stars that they did have, like Kazushi Sakuraba and Minowa Man, weren't a big enough draw by themselves. However, this all changed in 2015 with the founding of Ryzen by President Nobuyuki Sakagibara, the same guy who was the president of Pride. The founding of Ryzen was a very big deal for the time, since Ryzen basically promised a return to the good old days of Pride. The first event that they ever put on was 3 straight nights of fights featuring big names like Kazushi Sakuraba, Fedor, Yuri Prohaska, King Mo, and Vadim Nemkov. For 2.5 more years, they kept on bringing in big names like Koji Horiguchi and Mirko Krokop as well. However, the problem of no new big stars remained. At least that was until 2018, with the rise of the Asakura brothers. Part 2, the Asakura brothers. Alright, so I'm now finally at the point where I can talk about these two. And first off, the most important thing that I have to explain is that Kai Asakura, the brother making his UFC debut, is the less famous brother. Mikuru Asakura, the older of the two, is much more well known in Japan, with larger followings on both YouTube and Instagram. Kai is basically the Luigi to Mikuru's Mario, although most would also say that Kai is a better and more accomplished MMA fighter than Mikuru is. So getting into who Mikuru Asakura is, Mikuru had a story typical of many MMA fighters, getting expelled from high school for getting into a fight with another student, and being sent off to juvie for driving without a license. However, as we know from numerous examples such as John Jones, Conor McGregor, and Jorge Masvidal, being a criminal is one of the best bases for becoming a star in MMA. So, Mikuru was primed to get started on his path to fame and fortune. However, unlike the pound-for-pound GOAT of MMA and the cocaine leprechaun Conor McGregor, Mikuru Asakura actually completes his redemption arc like the anime hero he is. Mikuru and Kai, the latter of whom was much better behaved and actually managed to graduate high school, started training seriously in their teens. After training for a few years and participating in a few amateur bouts, Mikuru made his pro debut. Within a few fights, Mikuru won 2 belts in The Outsider, an MMA promotion focused on rehabilitating delinquent youth through martial arts. Kai Asakura also won a belt here as well. Mikuru Asakura then went on to amass a record of 6-1 before getting the call to fight the former UFC fighter Hatsuhikoki in Ryzen, where he brutally KO'd the veteran with a left high kick. This highlight KO over a veteran, along with Mikuru Asakura's down-to-earth personality and redemption story as a troubled youth finding his way in the world through mixed martial arts, was the perfect combination to birth a new star. Mikuru Asakura was to Ryzen in Japanese MMA what Conor McGregor was to the UFC. Both are flashy featherweight southpaw strikers with a personality the audience couldn't get enough of. Hell, both Conor and Mikuru even boxed Floyd Mayweather, and they both lost. By KO. Of course, this goes without saying, but there are differences between the two. I'm not saying they're completely equivalent, since Mikuru does less trash talk, he's much more down-to-earth and relatable, and Mikuru also does not go on cocaine binges while cheating on his wife. Eventually, Mikuru built up a 7-fight win streak in Ryzen and gained the moniker Dojo no Densetsu, or Legend of the Streets. However, when he challenged for the Ryzen featherweight title, he lost to Saito Utaka. This fight, along with the rematch that they did a few years later, are definitely worth watching, especially if you want MMA that's a little different from the UFC Apex slop that we're fed on a daily basis. But losing this title fight wasn't as big of a deal for Mikuru's career as it may have seemed at the time, because by 2020, Mikuru had amassed a whopping 1.5 million subscribers on his main YouTube channel. As of the making of this video in November of 2024, Mikuru has 3.5 million subscribers on YouTube, and Kai Asakura, the Luigi to Mikuru's Mario, has 1.36 million subscribers on YouTube. To put that all in perspective, Chael Sonnen has 1.29 million subs on YouTube. Israel Adesanya has 1.15 million. The current biggest star in the UFC, Alex Pereira, has 518,000. Sean O'Malley, who is supposed to be this young superstar that appeals to a young audience, has 927,000. And if you look at the view to subscriber ratio, Mikuru and Kai both have the UFC's top stars completely beat. Anyways, getting back to Mikuru's story, in 2021, he helped establish a MMA/kickboxing promotion called Breaking Down, which consists of 1-round, 1-minute bouts between random misfits from all parts of Japanese society, ranging from former Yakuza to rappers to random Polish guys. It's basically Japanese street beefs. And the fact that anybody could get on Breaking Down, if they could scrap for a minute and say something unhinged or funny, was a major selling point of the organization, and further contributed to the Asakura brothers' reputations as the biggest names in Japanese MMA. In fact, by 2024, when Mikuru Asakura retired from competition at age 31, after a KO loss to Ren Hiramoto, a fight which itself became a source of controversy after doping allegations were levied at Hiramoto, it could easily be said that the Asakura brothers had outgrown Ryzen, like how Conor McGregor outgrew the UFC after his fight with Mayweather. Even when retired, a vlog of Mikuru doing construction gets millions of views. Mikuru doing construction, okay? He's not doing anything special. He's just doing a vlog of him going out there and, doing a blue-collar job. That's it. Anyways, what is undeniable in Japanese MMA today is that anything the Asakura brothers touch turns to gold. And in the case of Kai Asakura, who many consider to be the better martial artist than his older brother Mikuru, he was actually able to claim gold too, by winning the Ryzen bantamweight belt. And now you might be thinking, oh, well, Kai Asakura, he was outside of the UFC. He must have KO'd some random can in order to get that belt. Well,
wrong.
Kai Asakura beat Juan Archuleta by knees to the body in order to get that belt. And Juan Archuleta, he's a former Bellator champion, and he was also the first and only guy to beat Patchy Mix. So, as for the level of competition that Kai Asakura is going up against outside of the UFC, I would say that it is 100% UFC caliber. Other notable names on Kai Asakura's resume include Koji Horiguchi, the former Bellator bantamweight champion and the current Ryzen flyweight champion, who Kai Asakura is 1-1 with, Manel Kape, the UFC contender that you're all familiar with, who Kai Asakura is 1-1 with, and Hiromasa Ogikubo, who Kai is also 1-1 with. Now, you might not know who Ogikubo is, but he is very legit, although he's a bit of a smudge grappler like Bilal or Marab. And just for the record, Ogikubo has a win over Alexandre Pantoja on Season 24 of TUF, although Ogikubo then did go on to lose finals to Tim Elliott. So, there's that. So what's evident from all of this is that Kai Asakura has been fighting top-tier flyweight and bantamweight competition outside of the UFC. Does that make him any more deserving of a title shot? Probably not. But do I think he has a chance of beating Pantoja? Certainly yes. And the UFC is a private company that gets to do whatever it thinks will make the most money, so Pantoja versus Asakura is the fight that you're going to get. On top of all of that, you're probably going to love watching Kai Asakura fight, since Kai Asakura is all about standing and banging. His knees in particular are fantastic, and Kai Asakura is one of those rare fighters who has legit KO power at 125 pounds, with 62% of his 21 wins coming by KO. Now, getting on to part 3 of this video, here's why the Japanese MMA market is so lucrative. So, for this part, I came up with 3 major reasons why the UFC is probably salivating over getting Kai Asakura to fight for the title. And they are as follows. 1. Develop the UFC brand in a region that the UFC has struggled to find a foothold in historically. 2. Have Japanese fighters finally bring excitement to a stagnant and perennially starless flyweight division. And then finally, 3. Taking advantage of the current state of the Japanese economy, and specifically the weak yen, by investing now and reaping big benefits later. Starting with 1, the UFC has always struggled with establishing itself as the premier MMA organization in Japan. Dana couldn't do this during the Pride era, when he got Chocodile KO'd by Rampage and Pride, while trying to build him up as a star. And they didn't do this during the MMA Dark Age either. The UFC has so far failed with cracking into the Japanese market, which is dominated by Ryzen, and to a lesser extent by Breaking Down. You can go see this for yourself by looking at the YouTube following for Ryzen versus the UFC Japan YouTube channel. As of the making of this video, UFC Japan has 156,000 subscribers and is getting anywhere from around like a few hundred to a couple thousand views per promotional video, and a couple 100,000 views for free fights like Tetsuro Taire's fight against Alex Perez. When it comes to the number of views that the UFC Japan YouTube channel gets, honestly, I don't want to be too rude, but I'm getting almost as many views as they are, and my YouTube channel doesn't have, 1,000 subscribers yet. Hopefully that changes soon, but still, it's just not really that big of a thing. And when it comes to the highest viewed video, it's Francis Ngannou's highlight reel from 5 years ago, and that has, 900,000 views, which is quite respectable. However, that all pales in comparison to Mikuru Asakura getting 1.5 million views in a week doing construction after he's retired, and over 20 million views on his most popular content. Kai Asakura's daily sparring videos and vlogs get anywhere from 500,000 to 2.5 million views normally, and the free fights for Ryzen get tens of millions of views as well. In Japan, everybody knows that the UFC is the best organization with the best fighters. However, nobody cares because Japan's biggest stars, like Horiguchi, the Asakura brothers, and others, had been fighting in Ryzen. Furthermore, the UFC's heavyweight division is complete trash, so there really isn't an incentive for Japanese fans who missed the Pride era to watch that either. By signing Kai Asakura, the UFC will finally be able to get Japanese MMA fans to genuinely care about the UFC. Now, you might be wondering, what about Tatsuro Taira? What about the other Japanese prospects who are signed to the UFC right now? Aren't they like a big enough of a draw? Well, to be completely blunt, they aren't. At least not for casuals. Sure, everybody in the Japanese MMA scene knows about them, but will casual MMA fans want to watch a UFC pay-per-view just to watch Tatsuro Taira or Reinen Nakamura or Rei Tsuruya? No. But the Japanese audience will do that for Kai Asakura. Also, here's a fun fact about this fight between Kron Gracie and Bryce Mitchell that was made just recently for UFC 310. The reason why this fight was put on this card, with Kron Gracie getting a completely undeserved shot at a ranked opponent right after losing to Charles Jourdain in a pathetic display, is because Kron Gracie used to fight in Ryzen. So by putting him here, on the same pay-per-view card as Kai Asakura, the UFC is making it so that the Japanese fans will have another familiar face to watch. Now moving on to the second point, I'm going to be brief, but the UFC flyweight division is the second most boring male division in the promotion. No offense. Pantoja is a great champion, but he just really isn't that big of a draw. He's sort of hit or miss with his fights, going through wars with Moreno and Steve Erceg, while half-guard camping Royval. He also doesn't do all that much to promote himself, with the most memorable memes about him being an Uber driver while being a ranked fighter, and having his dad leave him while he was young. Now, I totally empathize with the guy. His life sucked, and he was born poor, and MMA helped him find a way out of poverty. But there's also a dozen other Brazilian fighters who fit that exact same description. If Kai Asakura were to become champion, I kid you not, the UFC might willingly and voluntarily start doing flyweight title fight main events for pay-per-view cards in Japan. Either that, or they might headline a fight night card with the flyweight belt and have Kai Asakura sell out an arena in Japan. Imagine Kai Asakura versus Moreno, or Asakura versus Taira in a Japanese versus Japanese main event, or even a trilogy bout with him and Manel Cape. And finally, this brings me to why the UFC is doing all this right now. I'll be brief because this is boring economic stuff. But right now, the Japanese yen is super weak, with $1 US equaling about 156 yen, give or take. Since I assume the UFC makes most of its revenue in US dollars, being an American company and all, this is a time when the UFC can get the most bang for their buck, literally and figuratively, in Japan. By investing now into the Japanese market, the UFC could make a ton of money back later on when the yen is stronger. Oh, and I didn't know where I could add this final bonus point anywhere in the rest of the script, but I also have to mention that pirating anything in Japan is heavily, heavily, heavily looked down upon. If you say something like, I pirated that manga, or I torrented a movie, people will condemn you like you just killed their father and pissed on his grave. There's an immense amount of respect for authors and artists and martial artists. So yeah, Dana can be assured that he'll be getting his money from the Japanese audience. Anyways, just to wrap things up and summarize everything, the Dana White privilege that Kai Asakura is getting is because he's a huge star with good wins, and his brother is an even bigger star outside of the UFC. And together, they're going to probably help the UFC crack into a market that has remained outside of the UFC's grasp forever, while also fixing one of the less exciting men's divisions in MMA. I hope this video was informative, and I hope that everybody kind of understands what is going on exactly over here in Japan, and why Kai Asakura is getting that undeserved title shot. So, I hope that you have a nice rest of your day, and goodbye.